Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we're going to be talking about communication. That's right, but communication in a way that you're probably not familiar with. Most of us have heard of quantum states, quantum fields, and certainly quantum mechanics, as well as quantum physics. But today we're going to be talking about what is known as quantum silence. Just imagine that as you were a little baby before you learned language, that you were actually involved and actually intricately woven into this particular energy that lays all around you. This type of communication is known as quantum language. And as science begins to apply these strange and seemingly new quantum energies to our everyday technologies and lives, our minds are beginning to awaken to a new freedom that perhaps we're just not familiar with, but we can learn to harness, achieve, and communicate. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest who's going to be talking with us about how we can actually develop this in our later lives and be able to tap into its abundant resources. He is the founder of a wonderful thing that we'd like to be able to experience and be able to share that with everybody that we know as well. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Mark Grovers. Mark, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Thank you so much, Daniel. It's actually Govers, and I really appreciate that introduction. It's very well said.
Well, thank you very much. Well, let's talk about this quantum language. What exactly are we talking about here, if we talk at all?
Well, yeah, it actually is a little bit challenging to describe, but I'll do my best. I wonder if I should mention the double slit experiment to give people an idea about the quantum nature of our universe. Do you mind if I explain that really quickly?
Absolutely, please.
Okay. So basically, physicists, what they did was they fired electrons one at a time through two slits of a material, and they behaved as expected, making two bands on a back wall, markings on a back wall. Really simple, straightforward, just particles hitting the wall. Now, when they measured these electrons, so they basically had an observer effect on these two slits, then suddenly the electrons behaved as waves, and they know what waves look like on the back wall because they create an interference pattern. And so then you see many bands across the back wall. So the only thing they changed was observing the effect. And so this is quite profound, and of course scientists are studying it externally. And where I'm feeling like this is the next frontier for our minds and our consciousness is to embrace this reality.
Now, how did you discover this?
Well, it all started, I would say, in my 20s. I was reading a lot about silence off and on through my spiritual research. And I actually had some very interesting awakening experiences. And I can talk more about that later if you'd like. But then further down the road, in my late 20s, I was having a lot of health challenges. And I was in a lot of pain. And I was like, okay, I had these amazing experiences in my early 20s. How come I can't magically heal myself or get back to those states? And I was thinking about silence. And I was, like the Toltecs, they talk about stopping the world, that if we stop the inner dialogue, the whole world, in a sense, stops and changes. And I never really, understood what they meant by that. And there was many other things I'd read about the monks being silent and everything, and I thought, well, it's got to be a peaceful state, it's a good space to pray in, but I never really understood the significance of it until after I began to experiment with it myself. So that's what happened. I was in a great deal of pain, and I remember I was staying with family, and I just, locked the door, said I need some alone time, and I spent the day in silence. And I noticed that my mind became much more concentrated and focused, and this peace overcame me. And I started to feel integrated with the universe, and I started to see how the things that I imagine are part of the fabric of my being. And this all unfolded as I really enjoyed this state. I wanted to spend more time in it and learn about it. And I was really surprised at all the things that I was discovering. I thought it would just be relaxing, but it was awakening me to a deeper reality. So that's how it started.
Now, it's pretty interesting when you think about this because you begin to understand how ideas, desires, things like that kind of form, but you wonder, where do they really come from? Are you the thought or the thinker, so to speak? And to be able to get in touch with something like that and realize that it's also a way that you can develop intuition to a level that guides you. And it seems today that we so consistently tend to reach outside of ourselves, that we look for others to show us the way or how to do things, that we get to a point that we not necessarily lose confidence, but we surrender the confidence in ourselves to be able to know that we can be guided for our own lives. And it seems that what you share here is a way to get back to that. Does that make sense?
Perfect sense. Yeah, you actually mentioned a couple things there that are interesting. Where if we are the thought or the thinker, one of the things I noticed in this state was that there's a lot of different energies around us, and we're kind of trained to deal more with objects and ideas and concepts, and we kind of shut out the rest of the things in order to function in our social world. But one of the things I noticed was that in this state, I was realizing that some of my thoughts were mine, I created them, but some were actually impulses from the beyond. And I was getting useful information. Previously I thought, oh, those are my hunches, my intuition, but I actually felt like I was contacting something far beyond myself, and it was guiding me, like this intelligent energy. And one of the things I've noticed that you can, a person can tell when they're when they've penetrated to a sufficient level where they begin to communicate with the world around them in a new way, this quantum language I call it, is a person feels, in my experience, a flow. So everything just flows. The timing of things, it's like we're in an ocean of energy, and it's all in harmony. And when we move away from it and analyze it with our minds, then we begin to be a little bit out of sync with it, and life seems more random. But in this quantum state, it's all very peaceful and empowering. And another aspect to it is that I'll get ideas about things or solutions to situations, and they will come so fast to me that there's no time for my mind to even understand what's happening. And I just do the action in the moment, and then it passes, and my body knows, my nervous system knows that was the perfect thing to do. I can feel that harmony, but my mind's like, what happened? So,
right.
Finding that it is very confidence instilling, and I definitely have found less of a need to look for the answers outside of myself after these experiences.
Now, it's pretty exciting as you be able to share this with people, the idea of releasing, sort of letting go, but that doesn't mean that you completely surrender to what it is you want, but it's the ability to trust that it's going to be able to manifest itself. And I think that's what people tend to sometimes find challenging.
Now, are you talking about desires?
Well, it's desires, it's thoughts, impulses, the idea that when you take that step forward that you can trust that it's the right thing for you specifically, even though it seems maybe crazy to somebody else.
Yes. I've discovered, even though we're all in this quantum soup together, and going back to the quantum thing, what's really interesting, if you think about the particle and the waves and the observer effect, I mean, obviously, we are that. We are these particles and waves. We are these two things going on. We're part of the quantum soup that we're in, and we all have that connection. But at the same time, we're all in a different part of it, in a different moment of it. experiencing it uniquely to ourselves. So really, ultimately, the ultimate solutions are going to be inside of us. And yeah, I'm very confident in that. I've seen it happen over and over again. And one of the things that I offer actually is a service called Quantum Translation. And that's where I go in the state. The person can join me if they wish, but basically I get into that state and solutions just come to me like water, and people describe their issues. So it can be used that way too, like outside of a person. But yeah, I really would encourage anybody to try to access this state, and it may take a while. I spent over a month, but that's about the longest I did. It was, I think, about 5 weeks. And I was out in the world interacting with mechanics and shopping and everything, and it was kind of, gutsy, I'd say, because, people give you a lot of looks, but I navigated my way through the world just fine, writing notes and giving hand signals, but I feel so in tune with that state, and everything is just kind of effortless.
That must be very exciting to be able to achieve something like that, and to be able to basically surrender and move in directions that you could never have actually thought you were capable of.
Yeah, I built up to that. I've had different experiences with silence and also with other people. Like, I remember once I was in silence with a person that I thought, let's do this together. I'll show you what this is like, and we'll experiment and have fun. And she was at the very, very beginning stages of silence, because she was actually, when she wanted to communicate to me, she would whisper it. So she would be like, and that's not really silence. So there's different layers, and so people will slowly. It depends on people's willingness to go into this, and I think it takes an adventurous person, to kind of explore and experiment, and it's just it's just really relaxing, and just seeing what happens. But it does take some time, and one of the secrets I've discovered with this is what makes it different from just being silent or quiet is there's a couple things. One is that, let's go back to before we were children. I mean, before we were speaking as children. And and our mom and dad, they're trying to get us to talk, and they want us to play the game, and we're like, oh, this looks like a fun game. Let's play. And so, okay, I'll say, Mommy. Oh, look how excited they get. And that this is great. And so you learn a few words, and then, but before that, we already had our language. We had our quantum language. We were living in the energy. We knew how to communicate with it, and the universe made sense. But now we're kind of stepping into the linear world. So we're playing at our play table. We're maybe finger painting, and we're living in this imaginary kingdom that's very real to us. And then all of a sudden it's, hey, Johnny, hey, Susie, come help me with the cookies in the kitchen. And that's right, Mommy wants me to say one of these linear words. So, okay, Mommy, coming right now. And so it pulls us out of the quantum world more and more as we grow up, because essentially we have to be ready. We have to be on call at all times. And nothing wrong with this. It helps us function, helps us all kind of level the playing field on our planet. But it comes at a sacrifice. We slowly start to slip out of this random quantum-like nature of the world, where two things can happen at once, where the imaginary world is blended with the physical world. And what happens eventually is our attention, rather than resting in the center of the body, actually begins to just stay around the head, because it's convenient. We have to respond all the time. So the attention's more around the throat area and the head area, which is an interesting discovery. That's one of the many things that I've found. And so it takes some time for that to settle back down. And the first time it took about 3 days. And then the attention was in the middle. And that's when the clarity happens, when the signals come in clearer from creation, however you'd like to say it, God, all that is. And I kind of think of it like a satellite flying through space, a lonely satellite, and at first it's not functioning right, and so it kind of shuts down some of its operations, and it's kind of slowly spinning through space. But then all of a sudden, it somehow the electronics come on and it finds its center, and then these antennas come out, and then the satellites, oh yeah, wow, I can hear these signals now, that's right. And then it becomes a much more than just this object in space. It becomes connected to everything.
It's pretty fascinating to realize that, this is available to all of us. How do you know, or how do you feel we get disconnected from this source to the point where at times we just can't count on ourselves?
Yeah, it's a great question. I feel like words, okay, here's an interesting way to think about words. I realize that our attention, which is singular in nature, is very few people can actually split their attention into multiple things. They talk about multitasking, but there's an experiment I've done with a lot of friends where you study the fingerprints on your finger, and what you do is you try to see new grooves in your fingerprints, while at the same time you ask them to explain something that happened in grade school. And the person will immediately take their attention off of their finger, and they will look back at the grade school event. They can't do both at the same time. So we are limited. We have our limited capacity to focus and put our attention on things. So when we put our attention on words, words are like blocks. They're like little building blocks. And we've used these same building blocks our whole life. And so when we communicate and we think and we try to process, we're trying to awkwardly use these blocks to figure it out most of the time. I mean, some of us obviously use our intuition to greater or lesser degrees, which helps. But these blocks, they're kind of constantly there in our mind. And then if you look at the mind or the head as a bowl, which is an interesting analogy, looking at it as a bowl that can contain only so much. And this energy will pass through us, and then we'll process it, and then more will pass through. So what I'm getting at here is that it's very distracting if we rely on the blocks too much, the little building blocks, the wood blocks. It's just how we function in this world. Everybody has a different state of consciousness and different capacities, and these words are great because we can talk to anybody and we can get these essential ideas off, but they're very limited at the same time. And so I think a lot of people, they lose confidence. They're never 100% sure about things, and or rarely, let's say, and that's unfortunate. But it's just part of our learning process, I believe, and it's okay. And the people that are really frustrated with it, they'll seek for different things like meditation, and they'll slowly, regain that confidence and seek a higher truth. And so, did that answer your question, or?
It does. It's just a matter of, understanding, where do we begin, where do we trust that beginning, where is the end, and everything in between, to the point that you just don't get lost.
Well, I find that, like I myself, I'm definitely not like a master. I don't have it all figured out. I've had a lot of wonderful experiences, and I feel like I'm growing, I'm unfolding, but I don't feel like I'm lost or anything. It's just I can still kind of stumble around in life at times, but I remember the state, and if I do get too far away, I'll just I'll go back into it, and then I'll kind of straighten myself out, and then I'll continue on. So it can be revisited. And what's interesting too is that the universe, there is some kind of intelligent design, because what I noticed is that I'm given like a certain amount of ideas and things, but it's like it's tailored for me. It's like I get a certain amount, and then it kind of quiets down, and there might not be anything but just peace and quiet while I'm in the silence. And but then other times it's just, wow, a lot's coming at me. I'm getting all these insights and everything, and anytime I want to, turn it off, it's not hard to do. I just get involved with my life, start talking to people, and it goes in the background. So but it's there if I want it. And I like to call this intentional silence because some people, they live alone or they go walk in the woods and they think, oh, I'm silent all the time. But it's really not the same. Again, going back to the time before we spoke language as children, there was a big, commitment in the state as when we were born and grew up into that energy. But then we slowly become less and less committed to it. So in order for this to happen, I feel like people need to tell the world, tell their friends, I'm not going to be talking this weekend or Friday night. I'm not going to talk, and I'm going to explore this intentional silence and see if I can maybe get to this quantum language that's what I call it. And it's that commitment that's required because we are so embedded in society, most of us, that it requires that kind of commitment.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking, too, when you consider meditation, a lot of people, they pursue meditation because, for instance, they might have discovered some mystical experience they read in a book that comes from the Eastern mystics, so to speak. And so as they pursue meditation, they realize, well, this is actually work. This is a consistent exercise that you need to do regularly to really understand and experience the benefits that meditation can bring to you. But you begin to see, as you're describing, this idea of silence to allow messages to come and work through you. It's quite an amazing thing when you realize, oh, okay, so these are the potential benefits of meditation, but this is also quite different at the same time.
Yeah, I would say that it is meditation, but it's interesting because this actually has profoundly affected my regular meditations that I do before bed. I try to do it every day, but sometimes I'll skip a day. Basically, a lot of people, I feel, in observing and in myself, they bring the world in with them into their meditation, and that isn't really very effective. I myself included. I'll spend half my meditation trying to get out of just my regular mind, and so if we can use this intentional silence and learn how to let our attention fall back to the middle, that's really useful in our everyday life. But also, if we start from that place and then meditate, it's much more profound and effective.
Now, what are, for our listeners out there, a typical exercise or a way that people can actually begin to experience what we're talking about here today?
Well, a couple of tools are recommended. Just one, really. One tool there's a thing I use. It's called Boogie Board, and you can get it online at Amazon. It's really handy. I mean, otherwise you might have reams and reams of paper if you have family and stuff that you need to talk to. But the Boogie Board is really great. It's sort of like an Etch-a-Sketch, but you just hit a button and it erases, and it's very handy. So you can just write notes to people. And I haven't found that writing notes or hand signals interferes at all with the process, which at first I wasn't sure of that, so I didn't, do anything, and I just kind of looked at my family blankly, which they didn't like very much. But the writing things down in hand signals, I found it to be just fine, and that's useful. But I do find that if a person's able to do this, and I would, in conjunction with somebody else, that it helps because that social aspect, it really provides great contrast. And sorry about that, it's a call coming through, but I'll let it go. So that's a great tool in itself because it'll help a person see, oh, okay, I can see where they are and I can see where I am. Look at this, look what's happening here, and my attention's sinking down and I'm starting to relate to the world in a new way. So that's really basically it. Just people could let the world know that they're not going to be talking for a period of time, X amount of hours or days, and just to have that tool, and ideally to have someone around to communicate with, that's a very interesting experience. But if you can't, you can maybe turn on the TV and watch the people talking as you're spending time in silence.
Fascinating stuff. You kind of wonder, can people actually be silent?
Again, it does take practice to settle down. So if people aren't really feeling anything, or noticing anything, I wouldn't give up. If you just set maybe a regular day, maybe once a month or every weekend, X amount of time to be silent, I would say, it's a good time to just let go of all the concerns and just explore, have fun, because one of the things what happens to me is I realize I'm not quite who I thought I was. I'm not an isolated being in a body. I'm consciousness, and I have access to the entire universe, and it's a big place. And anything I think of, I begin to experience it, and that leads me to another thing that I've discovered in quantum language is that this clear state, when you get to the center, again, you're very clear, and so decisions and truths become more obvious, and frequencies become more tangible. So, like if you imagine the moon, for instance, and you look at the dark side of the moon, you wonder what's there, and you're really quiet. You're in this quantum space. And you're looking at the surface of the moon, and the craters and everything like that. It will actually it'll touch the consciousness, and it becomes discernible. There's little nuances there that can be measured. The heart is like a measuring device that God gave us, and this when we're in this clear state, we can begin to measure these different frequencies and get our answers. And so we can basically travel the whole universe in silence, and we can explore our childhood, we can explore all of our different concerns, and we can do a lot of processing, we can resolve a lot of issues. So there's lots to do.
It's pretty amazing what you're describing, because it allows the listeners to know that, we really were born with just pretty much everything we would ever need. It's just right there. And again, as I was saying earlier in the program, we tend to surrender over to others we think know more about us than we do. For instance, you take a look at the, medicine, that a doctor says, well, it's in my experience that you have this, and this is the right protocol for you to be able to pursue. But we're also finding that more and more people are actually breaking particular protocols like that and finding new ways of healing, for instance. So all of a sudden, maybe that outside person didn't know more than I did about how to deal with the particular modality that I have. It's the same way, whether it's business, whether it's manifesting goals, dreams, desires, relationships, all of it. And you know how to do all of these things. You are equipped with the right tools to discover all these things for yourself, and getting to that point to be able to trust in such a way that life will just simply amaze you.
I really like what you said there, Daniel. And I just want to add to it. I would say I've been through what you've experienced. I was a bit of a rebel growing up, and I always wanted to do kind of things my way. And I did see some people that really depended on authorities. And, I've seen, I was proud of myself that I was figuring a lot of things out. I basically healed my own body, actually, largely through the quantum translation and language. And I was, really proud of that. But I've since come to learn that in the quantum state, it's also very useful because it really helps me to see my limits. And, as I'm still a growing being and expanding. So while I am able to get a lot of truths, at the same time, sometimes I'll see someone who, they've actually explored this pretty deeply, and I can see that they know. So it's not only great for analyzing the truth, within myself, but it's also great for helping me see who actually has some truth that I need. So it's a great truth filter. So I'd say I wouldn't give up on doctors or healers or lawyers or business people, but I would definitely scrutinize them, and I would I would look within to try to find what's useful, if that makes sense.
It certainly does. Now, your website is orangesunlabs.com?
Yeah, that's right.
And tell us about that.
Well, I offer quantum translation, like I spoke of earlier. I have a couple of different therapies. I have another one called gem holographic therapy, which is interesting. It has to do with the holographic nature of the universe, which I discovered in quantum language. I also have some tools on there that people can explore. One of the things I learned in quantum language is that the body is like a tuning fork, and that it can get out of tune. And I don't know if people are familiar with the idea of sympathetic resonance, but one of the things I studied was if you go to in a guitar store and you struck the E string on a room full of guitars, if the guitars are close together, another E string will vibrate. Actually, on all the guitars, they'll all vibrate a little bit, and so that's without touching those guitars. That's called sympathetic resonance. So our bodies are like that, and so some of the tools I offer on my website are they can bring you back into tune, which is useful for meditation and just succeeding in life. But removing distractions is what makes quantum language and this intentional science successful. So these tools will help people just get there a little bit quicker. So I've discovered that if you, for instance, some of my tools are sprays. If you take the spray within, like you take a deep inhale and hold that breath for between 10 and 30 seconds, I found that usually 10 seconds helps. 30 seconds always tunes the body into a different space after the breath is held for that period of time. So the breath is actually another great kind of instrument that we have in us to help us kind of control our states and our well-being.
This is also exciting because you consider that that mystical experience of enlightenment isn't so unachievable anymore. Describe what enlightenment has been for you.
Oh, I'm glad you asked that. It's my favorite subject. Again, I'm not a master. And I was speaking to someone about, I call myself a master in training because I want to be a master, but I'm not there yet. But I was speaking to someone the other day about enlightenment, and she was disagreeing with me. She was saying enlightenment is a permanent state. Once you achieve it, you can't lose it. Because I felt that I had experienced enlightenment. Okay, here's my definition of enlightenment, and it's very simple. Not always so easy to achieve, but it's basically that we are immersed in matter through our thought, our emotion, our feeling, our everyday life, everything we're paying attention to. We're kind of swimming in matter. Enlightenment is where we are able to extricate, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, ourselves from matter. In other words, we go back to our pure state. We're a pure being, which is what we naturally are, but we lose it. And we're all that. We're all that pure thing that's woven into matter. And I've experienced this on a number of occasions. And it actually, looking back, I realized that it had to all do with this deep inner silence. But there was a couple different ways I got there. One was I was just trying to stop thinking. And I had this interesting little analogy about myself that helped me get there. I imagined that I was an atom in God's body, and that I was the neutron, my true self, me, actually who I really am, and that the electrons that were flowing around me like they do an atom are the emotions of my being, and that the protons flowing around me were my thoughts. So my idea was that if I didn't cling to the electrons or the protons, the emotions and the thoughts, that I would become my essential self again. that was my idea. And I remember I was sorting through gemstones at this gemstone place that I worked. And it was really interesting because I learned that in order to stop thinking, I have to stop looking inside my mind, and I have to just be aware. And so as I was sorting these beads, I found myself staring at these beads in order to not slip back into thought again. And it took me a long time. It took me, I'd say at least 3 hours of staring at these beads over and over again, where I finally felt this like kind of a suction, a pull, and then I felt like a little pop sound in my forehead, and then I was like floating, and I was free. I was this pure being. An amazing state. I mean, I felt angelic beings around me. I felt I could see people were being too hard on themselves, and that they should just relax and enjoy life. And I could see that people weren't confident in themselves. I could see that that everybody wanted the state. Actually, it was interesting. When I was in this office, actually everybody came around, and they were smiling at me, and nobody was talking. Everybody was just smiling, and I felt like there was a spiritual fire around me, and it's like they were coming to cozy up by the fireplace. And I just couldn't say anything because there was no way I could explain what I was experiencing. But of course, everybody can get this if they want. If they can stop their thought, they can go into this experience. And I really believe that. But the first time that this happened actually was a couple of years before this, and I was actually working at Fred Meyer Christmas Help, and I was integrating the dream world and the physical world. And is there anything else you'd like to say, Daniel, or should I go ahead and talk about that?
No, please continue.
Okay. Well, I had been studiously writing my dreams down for like 4 years, and with a teaching that recommended that, and I was trying to understand my dreams, and one of the things I learned about them was not to analyze them in a logical manner. I realized that my dreams are more of like an emotional fabric, and then if I translate the emotional fabric into like logic, then I was getting real information. So like I would feel the fabric of the dream, and then I would turn that into information, and translate the feelings into something I could use. And so I was having some success with that, and I was becoming really familiar with being more awake in my dreams, having lucid dreams, and so on. And I had read this particular book that was talking about, if you're in a dream and you find yourself awake in a dream, if you focus on an object and command yourself to awaken, these veils will fall away, and the dream will become more solid than ever, and you will be more awake than ever. And I thought, wow, that's fascinating. And they also use the term waking dream quite consistently. And so I began to think, maybe, are they saying that somehow that this is a dream, that this waking life is a dream, and that if I accept that, somehow it will transform magically. And so that's what I did. I surrendered to this idea, and I was feeling real brave and adventurous, and I was stocking shelves at Fred Meyer, and I was dancing in the aisle a little bit. I was laughing with people. I was just kind of, I let go, and I was just doing what I would do if I was in a dream. I just completely let go. And this is the first time the whole suction thing in my forehead happened, and it took about 3 hours or so, estimation. But again, I popped out. I was this expanded, pure being, free of all matter. I could feel this amazing flow going through me that instilled me with just oodles of confidence, and everything I thought was like, it had all this power in it and all this love in it, and I just knew that I was in a real space. I was in the real space, and I felt like I was in a rowboat before, and like I'd fallen out of the rowboat, and now I was in the ocean. And it was funny because I'd gone in this state a number of times, and actually after going in the 2 ways that I just mentioned with the gemstone sorting and the dream way, I found that I could just stare at an object, and I could go into that state by telling myself that it's a dream and getting into that feeling. And I found that what really helped me do it was to go back to my study of dreams and really embrace that exact same feeling of what it feels like to be in a dream here. And that's what I find that we don't do naturally at this time in our history, is that we kind of put that at arm's length. That's for nighttime. That's not for daytime. and that if we let that feeling come in and center itself in our heart, that we will go into this amazing space. Mm-hmm. So that suction happened, and I was free. But I questioned the space. I was like, okay, I'm not flying. I thought I could fly in my dreams, and the world's still the same. So I started to question it. I still saw the same physical world. It was just me who had changed. So I didn't fully integrate this space, and as I questioned it, I got back woven into matter again. And I was okay with it. I just thought, okay, I know that space is there. That's an internal space. It's not going to go away. And it's funny. It was almost like ticklish. It was like, ooh, it feels so good. It's so ticklish. And I'm okay. I'm not in a hurry. I know I have eternity to figure this out. So.
I like that you talk about, if you will, consider them waking dreams, but it's the idea that even in the dream world, it's not separate from the reality of the waking world. They're very much the same thing, and you're the one experiencing it. The mind doesn't really know the difference in the first place. And I think it's fascinating to realize that you get information, energy, like in the dream states, for instance, and the way that we try to interpret those things into a reality during dreaming can sometimes be a bit confusing, at the same time astonishing. I remember there was a time that I had a dream, and it was about this particular person that I had never met before. And there was this very unique mark that was on his throat, actually, down to the lower part of his throat. And that next day, I was out with a friend of mine, and she decided she wanted to go see a friend of hers who happened to be living with this guy who looked exactly like the person I dreamed about. And I thought to myself, well, this is kind of strange. But that wasn't the first time. I've had so many experiences where in the dream worlds, something was presented to me that was very unique, very fresh, and something that I didn't experience. And then in the waking world, it materialized, and you tried to think, well, now, how is this possible? It gets kind of crazy sometimes.
Yes. It's so fascinating. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I've actually experienced also as well, dreaming of things in advance. But that is the nature of this reality. And, the way we perceive it is because we're so embedded in matter again. I don't know if you've had this, Daniel, but sometimes when I go before to bed at night, maybe I'll eat something and I shouldn't have eaten that. And so then I'm having these dreams that are terrible dreams. But isn't it interesting that how we feel changes the whole world that we experience at night? Well, it's similar here. We have these physical bodies, and if our body feels heavy, we're going to experience the world as heavy. If our body feels light, we're going to experience the world as light. And that's the dreamlike nature of this reality as well. And I believe that as we explore these quantum states through quantum language, and as we learn to adapt our technologies to work with our consciousness and our biology in ever greater ways, that we are going to raise our frequencies to the point where we will see this more and more. We'll see the dreamlike nature.
It's such fascinating to be able to talk about something like this, especially when you can get to a point of being in silence. It's interesting that people, and this may seem like a stretch, when it comes to addictions, one of the most consistent things people say as to why they maybe drink too much or whatever it is that they do that changes or alters their state of reality is because they're bored. How do you address somebody like that?
Well, I remember once reading what a master, he's a really cool guy out of Chicago. I think his name's Avenue, something like that, but he's cool. He had an awakening experience, and I remember what he said about smoking. It was interesting. He said, tell a smoker to go in a small room and smoke a whole case of, carton of cigarettes. He said, when they come out of there, they're not going to want another one ever again.
I can imagine.
and the point I take from that is awareness. They become so blatantly aware of, how nasty that can be.
Right.
And so the thing is if people go into this, if they're able to let go of the world for a while, spend some time in intentional silence, if they're willing, they're going to slowly become more aware of themselves. One of the things I've noticed is that it's kind of bizarre sometimes, but sometimes actually the world will look a little bit alien to me when I'm in this state. It's like, we kind of tend to take everything for granted. Here we are speaking with these bodies, and we're living on a planet. We don't know where this planet is. It's somewhere in space. What's that? It's just here we are. We're doing our thing. We don't really question things all that much. A lot of times we're too busy to. And so this whole experience is, I find myself just really being grateful for it. I know that I'm just a visitor here. I can't get too upset about anything once I see what of a temporal nature all this is. This experience is to be enjoyed, I feel, and it makes it much more tolerable, I think, once we can soften our idea about that, and so this silence it helps us to let go, basically, and so it's fantastic for addiction because it will help us see those things more clearly, and then we can decide, well, I still want to do it, I still like it, or I see it in a new light now, and maybe I won't do it as much, or maybe I won't do it at all because I found something else now I like better.
Mm-hmm. Do you find that as you have presented this work to people, that they tend to think to themselves, I've never thought about it this particular way before, but that I have pursued all of these distractions in my entire life because I was trying to get away from myself. In other words, I had discovered at a particular time in my life where I really wasn't sure that I could live with myself. So I needed a distraction, an escape, something other than where I am, so that way I can kind of get away from that aspect that I really don't want to see. And I'm kind of remembering the Flintstones, the cartoon. And what was funny was there was a scene where Fred Flintstone was standing there and he was having a conversation with himself in the mirror in his bathroom. And the mirror says to him, I'll bet you can't live 24 hours with yourself. And Fred was, well, I'll bet you I can. And so he actually had to try to live with himself for 24 hours and realized all these annoyances that people had learned to live with and embrace because that was uniquely him. But he couldn't stand it. And how often we actually really think that about ourselves to a point that we try to find these things outside that help us to escape from that reality when in fact we should be going into saying, why am I uniquely this way? For instance, it sounds to me like you probably were the same way I was as a child, kind of that weird thinking, so to speak. It can be considered weird thinking by others, I'm sure, but here's the thing. I just remember thinking, and I still do to this day, I'm astonished, when I think of being aware that I'm alive, that I feel this. It's not an egotistical state. It's more of a, wow, I'm alive and I have an awareness that I'm alive. And it's sometimes a really weird feeling, but once you settle into it, you realize everything happening before me, is sort of a movie in its own intricate play, and I get to be a part of it. The question is, how do I want to be a part of it? And it gets to be astonishing when you consider what we're talking about here today, that science from silence, as to how you can co-participate in your own reality. And it sounds like the police are showing up to clear up all this destruction. And
yeah, you can hear that. Oh, there they go. Anyway, so... yeah, I remember a quote by, I think it was Pascal, the philosopher. He said that all of the world's problems stem from that a person cannot sit in a room by themselves and just, be there. Something like that. I thought that was interesting, kind of like your Fred Flintstone analogy there, or experience. I find that people, they divide themselves. I talked a little bit about male and female energies. Male energy, like aggressive, going out in the world, and then the female energy, kind of more passive, intuitive, kind of residing within. But there's a third force, the neutral force. And so a lot of people, when they're going, oh, I need to distract myself, I need to get away from that, a lot of times they're talking with the two different halves, those extreme halves, and they're not necessarily rested in their true elemental self, the peaceful, joyful self that actually everybody is. That's just our natural state. And once we get there and we get into that groove, then it becomes enjoyable to work from that space. And I'm trying to get there myself as more and more as I can. And I'm still juggling the outer world and the inner world, and trying to work with that the best I can. But but I definitely have more and more moments of just being so grateful to be alive, and it's a wonderful space to be in. And it's I actually had this thought before I came on the talk today, that I was imagining if politicians would just spend a day in a room together, not speaking, that would be a new beginning, that we would have a new peace come into the world. Because when we're in silent war, we can see our delicate nature and our affinity and our unity, and I don't believe anybody could raise an arm against another person if they could see that. We're all brothers and sisters, and that once we experience that, and I'll just talk about it, but once we start to really experience that on a fundamental, cellular level, more and more people experience that. It's all going to help contribute towards that. That's why I really wanted to talk about this. It's funny because silence has been around forever. Monks have been doing it for centuries, but I've never really realized how profound it was. I'm happy to get this out there.
Well, we're happy that you've been out there to be able to share this with people, because there is a lot of profound experience to be had by being in silence, by simply at times listening to your thoughts. You realize that there are times you'll grab a hold of a thought and you'll run with it down the rabbit hole, and boy, that one thought just kind of set the tone for at least most of your day, and you realize you'd spent that much energy nurturing the reality of nothing more than an ethereal piece of energy that was nothing more than maybe a memory or a thought about a memory. And that once you can liberate yourself from that state and you can be here now, it's pretty amazing what you're able to find yourself experiencing from that particular experience.
Yes, perceiving energy directly is the goal. We have all these energies around us, and it's fresh. Energy is fresh. It's not stale. And unfortunately, the nature of our thoughts, they have conceptions around them, they have emotions around them. So they tend to put us to sleep a little bit because we keep looking at them over and over again. We're like, okay, how is this new? Actually, right. Every moment is new, though. Every time we say something, it actually is fresh. It's made out of pure energy. But just the way that we use words, they tend to have those ideas associated with them, and they tend to put people to sleep a little bit. But yeah, so if we get into the fresh state, which is the goal of this silence, and begin to communicate with the universe. I mean, we have, like, the sun is putting all these energies off, like gamma rays, and those turn into electromagnetic and X-rays, and got protons and infrared, and we've got electromagnetic waves, and we have, I believe we have inner guides and all kinds of beings and other energies that we can't see, and nuclear forces, and gravitational forces, and we just have a lot going on here, and we put it in these nice little neat categories as scientists, but it's really just one big soup. And once we can be with it, the air and the birds buzzing through the sky and smelling the trees and feeling the trees' forces and the land's forces and the stars and everything around us. It's so full of life. And once we allow ourselves to join that life, then our lives are pretty good.
I'd say so. Well, Mark, it's been a true pleasure to have you here on the program to talk about this without having to allude to all the history of quantum mechanics and this guy said this and proved that. And, just really have some pure thoughts for ourselves about what it is to be alive. It's very exciting.
Oh, likewise, Daniel. Thank you for having me on, and I really enjoy, trying to discuss this best I can, and I hope I got a lot of it over, and I hope people experiment and explore. It's a really special place.
And have them explore your website, which is?
It's www.orangesunlabs.com.
Well, very good. Mark, thank you so much for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. And we encourage all of you out there to have great days as well as you explore our website, which is beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. And we encourage you to subscribe to our free e-news updates. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program. And remember, live your day past.